A child's scream that was never heard. A ransom note that made no sense. A family whose picture-perfect life was about to be shattered into a million pieces by accusations that would haunt them for nearly 3 decades. On the morning of December 26th, 1996, in the affluent town of Boulder, Colorado, the world woke up to a mystery so shocking, so profoundly heartbreaking, that it would consume the nation's attention and destroy lives in ways no one could have ever imagined. The Ramsey family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and 2 beautiful children. But behind the facade of their idyllic Christmas, a nightmare was unfolding. JonBenet Ramsey, just 6 years old, had vanished from her own bedroom. What happened next would become one of America's most infamous unsolved cases. Puzzle wrapped in tragedy that continues to baffle investigators and break hearts to this day. The little girl with the bright smile and pageant crowns had no idea that December 25th would be her last Christmas. As her family slept, something evil stirred in the shadows. By morning, JonBenet would be gone, and the Ramsey family would be thrust into a nightmare that would define the rest of their lives. What makes this story even more devastating is that for 28 long years, her older brother Burke carried a secret burden, staying silent while the world pointed fingers and whispered vile accusations. But now, after nearly 3 decades, his father is fighting for a truth that modern science can finally expose. Burke Ramsey was only 9 years old when his world collapsed. Imagine being a child, waking up to the sound of your mother's panicked screams, to chaos, confusion, and the unthinkable reality that your little sister is gone. While police cars filled the driveway and investigators swarmed through every room of their home, Burke stayed in his bedroom, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. He didn't understand what had happened. He couldn't comprehend why strangers were asking him questions, why his parents looked like their hearts had been ripped from their chests. The police, already suspicious, questioned the little boy. They looked for tells, for inconsistencies, for any sign that this child knew more than he was saying. For years after, people wondered why he didn't come out of his room that morning. Was he hiding something? The speculation was cruel and relentless, with tabloids pushing theories that he had accidentally harmed his sister over a piece of pineapple, and that his parents covered it up. This narrative, born from nothing but conjecture, turned a traumatized child into a suspect in the court of public opinion. When Burke finally spoke out years later, his voice cracked with emotion as he remembered that painful day. He talked about standing at JonBenet's funeral, staring at her tiny casket, and noticing how strange her eyes looked. That image burned itself into his young mind forever. He watched his father break down in tears while trying to explain that JonBenet was now in heaven. And that's when the reality hit him like a sledgehammer. His sister wasn't coming home. The ransom note found on the kitchen staircase was unlike anything investigators had ever seen. It wasn't a hastily scrawled demand. It was a bizarre 3-page epic, written on paper from a notepad inside the Ramsey home using a pen from their kitchen. It demanded exactly $118,000 for JonBenet's safe return. The amount wasn't random. It perfectly matched the bonus John Ramsey had recently received from work. A detail few people outside the family or his immediate work circle would know. But the note itself was rambling and oddly personal, signed Victory, SBTC, and claiming to be from a small foreign faction, was written with a calmness that seemed impossible for someone who had just committed such a horrific crime. Who takes the time to practice writing a note and then pen a 3-page letter in the middle of a kidnapping? Who uses the victim's own household supplies? The note haunted investigators because it made no sense. Real kidnappers want quick, untraceable cash and immediate escape routes. This seemed designed to confuse, to misdirect, to buy time. Handwriting experts were torn. Patsy Ramsey was forced to provide multiple handwriting samples made to write words from the note over and over until her hand cramped, all under the accusatory gaze of law enforcement. But the strangeness of the note would soon become meaningless, because the kidnappers never called. The deadline came and went in silence. The horrible truth was waiting just downstairs. Just hours after the frantic search began, a police detective instructed John Ramsey to do one last sweep of the house. He headed to the basement, a place they had somehow overlooked. There, in a small, windowless wine cellar, he made the discovery that would shatter his world. he found his daughter. She had been brutally assaulted and strangled with a makeshift garrote fashioned from a piece of cord and the broken handle of one of Patsy's paintbrushes. In his grief and panic, John ripped the tape from his daughter's mouth and carried her body upstairs, desperate for her to be alive. It was a father's instinct, but in the eyes of the police, it was his first big mistake, contaminating the crime scene. The entire investigation that followed was a disaster from the very beginning. The crime scene was compromised within hours, as friends, family, and even a minister were allowed to wander through the house, cleaning surfaces, moving items, and destroying crucial evidence. The Boulder Police Department made critical errors that would plague the case for decades. Instead of treating the Ramsey home as the delicate crime scene it was, they allowed it to become a chaotic mess. But perhaps the most devastating mistake was their immediate and unwavering assumption that the family was responsible. Rather than casting a wide net, investigators quickly focused their suspicions on John and Patsy, convinced they had staged an elaborate cover-up. His tunnel vision blinded them to other possibilities like an intruder and created a cloud of suspicion that would follow the family for the rest of their lives. Burke, just a 9-year-old boy, suddenly found himself viewed as a potential suspect. The media, fueled by leaks from within the police department, ran wild with these suspicions. Cable news and tabloids built an industry around the case, turning the Ramseys into villains. Every aspect of their life was dissected and judged. Their wealth was seen as suspicious. Patsy's history as a beauty queen was deemed narcissistic, and their decision to let JonBenet participate in pageants was painted as exploitation. The spotlight on Burke was particularly cruel. Here was a child who had lost his sister in the most horrible way imaginable, and instead of receiving comfort, he was subjected to intense scrutiny. People analyzed his behavior in old home videos, his expressions, his words, looking for any sign of deception. They didn't see a traumatized young man, they saw a suspect. The burden of carrying these accusations shaped Burke's entire life. John Ramsey watched helplessly as his family was torn apart. He had lost his daughter to a monster, and now he was losing his family to public opinion. Patsy Ramsey struggled under the intense pressure, her health deteriorating as she battled both ovarian cancer and the constant stress of being viewed as her daughter's killer. She died in 2006, never seeing her name cleared. Her final years spent defending her innocence instead of simply being allowed to grieve. The case seemed hopelessly frozen in time, till 2008, when new DNA technology provided a breakthrough that should have changed everything. Advanced touch DNA analysis, far more sensitive than anything available in 1996, revealed the presence of DNA from an unknown male on the waistband of JonBenet's long johns. This DNA definitively excluded John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey. The district attorney at the time, Mary Lacey, took the courageous step of issuing a formal, public apology to the family, acknowledging that they had been innocent all along and were victims of a terrible crime. But this vindication came too late for Patsy, and it did little to repair the damage. The public had been fed one narrative for over a decade, and even clear scientific evidence couldn't completely erase the deep-seated suspicion. Still, John Ramsey refused to let his daughter's case die with his wife. He became determined to use every advancement in forensic science to find JonBenet's real killer. When the Golden State Killer was caught in 2018 using public genealogical databases, John saw hope for the first time in years. The same technology that had tracked down a notorious serial killer, after 4 decades, could finally identify the man who had destroyed his family. The science existed to solve JonBenet's case. All he needed was cooperation, but that cooperation never came. Despite having the tools to potentially solve one of America's most famous cold cases, the Boulder Police Department has repeatedly refused to allow independent testing of the DNA evidence. John has pleaded, begged, and demanded that they use every resource available, but he continues to hit bureaucratic roadblocks. The department insists the investigation is active and ongoing, and that releasing evidence could compromise its integrity. But to John and his team of independent experts, these are just excuses. The same investigators who spent years convinced of the family's guilt now seem more interested in protecting their reputation than finding the truth. The frustration John feels is palpable. He knows that the technology exists to potentially identify JonBenet's killer within months, yet the evidence sits locked away. DNA expert C.C. Moore, who has solved hundreds of cold cases, has offered to help free of charge. She's confident that with access to the evidence, she could build a family tree from the unknown male's DNA and potentially identify him, but without police cooperation, her expertise means nothing. John's desperation has led him to take unprecedented action. He's petitioned the governor of Colorado to intervene and force the Boulder police to release the evidence for independent testing. A petition signed by tens of thousands of supporters. The tragedy of JonBenet Ramsey goes beyond the loss of one little girl. It's a story about how tunnel vision can destroy an investigation, how media sensationalism can ruin innocent lives, and how bureaucratic pride can stand in the way of justice. Today, John Ramsey is in his 80s, still fighting for his daughter with the same quiet determination he's shown for 28 years. He knows he may not live to see the case solved, but he refuses to give up hope. He's not seeking revenge, seeking justice for a little girl who never got the chance to grow up, never got to experience high school graduation, college, or children of her own. When he thinks about JonBenet now, he remembers her not as a victim, but as the vibrant, spirited, a child who brought joy to their home. If she were alive today, she would be 34 years old, perhaps with a family of her own. Instead, she remains forever 6, frozen in time as the smiling little girl in pageant photos. The system that should have supported a grieving father in his darkest hour instead made him its primary suspect. And that betrayal cuts deep. The story of JonBenet Ramsey is ultimately a story about love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of truth. 28 years have passed, but the fight continues. Somewhere in the evidence, in the microscopic traces of DNA left behind by a killer, lies the key to solving this mystery. The question is no longer whether the technology exists to find him, it's whether those in power will finally choose to use it.